The African American Legend series highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas as varied as politics, the arts, sports, business, literature, and religion. We will explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas where they've been previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity. I'm your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr., and with us today is Danny Simmons, artist and director of Project Diversity in the Arts. Hi, Danny.
Morning, Dr. Brown. How you doing?
Okay, now tell me about Project Diversity in the Arts. It's a very creative idea. Let's tell us about it.
Project Diversity is a concept I came up with about 2 years ago. I started noticing that my neighborhood was changing. I live in Clinton Hill, Brooklyn. It was changing. It was becoming a multicultural neighborhood, and I have a gallery in that neighborhood. And I started noticing the patrons coming to the gallery was multicultural. And so I started changing my gallery. It had typically been for African Americans and people of color. And I started including some white artists. And I joined an organization named South of the Navy Yard Artists in Brooklyn, which takes in Bed-Stuy, Clinton Hill, Fort Greene, south of the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And the members are of all races and backgrounds and genders. And I put on an art show with 3 galleries, and the show was so diverse, and we got such a large audience, such a great response. I said, well, if it's happening in this small area and we can get such a great response and get all these artists talking to each other, why don't I try this on a larger scale? And so what ended up was Project Diversity, where I've got galleries all over Brooklyn, 16 of them to be exact, to show 232 artists of varied background. And we purposely made sure that the galleries had a blend and a mix of artists of color, artists of different backgrounds, artists of different sexual persuasions, and also different types of art, diversity in all ways, diversity of the types of art being shown, and diversity of the artists showing it. And so we're getting ready to start that now. And one of the great things about it, to push more access for people, we're hiring shuttle buses to take people from gallery to gallery, so somebody can get on a bus in Williamsburg and end up in a gallery in Bed-Stuy, get off the bus, go to the gallery, go eat something in Bed-Stuy at one of the restaurants. So you're getting people moving from neighborhood to neighborhood and getting to know each other in Brooklyn.
That's a very creative concept. It really reflects the changing nature of parts of Brooklyn, parts of Queens, and even parts of Manhattan.
Right.
Brooklyn, as if it was a separate city, would be about the 4th or 5th largest city in the country.
Brooklyn used to be a separate city.
Until 1899, 1998, Brooklyn was a separate city.
And the biggest one.
And so what this does is to build on the diversity and the changing nature of Brooklyn. But the thing that I find very interesting is, how do you bring artists together? Because there's frequently competition among artists. So how do you bring them together?
Well, you know, there's competition among artists, not in the creative aspect, but to vie for spaces in galleries. Gallery space is limited. When you open something up and you get so many artists are just happy to get their stuff shown, you know, and we really got some great art in it. But people were really happy to end up in spaces that they didn't think were available to them. We were over at, last night, they had an opening at the Magnolia Tree Earth Center in Bedford-Stuyvesant, and the show was centered around environmental issues. And we had so many artists from around Brooklyn, black artists, white artists, and the white artists invariably say, I didn't know this was over here. What a great space. I mean, this place has been around for 20 years. Like the Skylight Gallery has been around for 30 years.
The Skylight Gallery in
Bed-Stuy Restoration Corporation. And so that gallery has been servicing our community for 30 years, but people outside of Bedford-Stuyvesant didn't know it was there, particularly the White House. They said, oh, I didn't know you had such a great gallery space over here. I'll be coming back here. And so, you know, the artists are just grateful to have opportunities to show their work in different spaces and to a different audience.
Well, the aesthetics of the art and the economics of the art do tend to converge.
Yes,
I assume that when these artists show, their work is available for people to see, but it's also available for people to purchase.
Well, that's the gallery owners and the artists' hope, that somebody will see their work and like it. That's a shot you take anytime you show. Some galleries have a little more expertise in selling things, and some galleries don't. A lot of the galleries that we involved in this are nonprofit galleries, which typically might sell something, but that's not their main focus. Their main focus is arts education for the public. One of the things that we did is when I raised the money to put this show together, and I raised over $100,000 from different corporations and foundations, is to build into that an artist honorarium. Mm-hmm. It's modest, but the artists do get some financial remuneration for being in the show.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, if their work sells, they
make some money.
Make some money.
They make some money. As a matter of fact, there's an artist, and I'm not going to say who, but at my gallery, that I'm going to buy their piece. Mm-hmm. You know, and this is a piece of art that I just fell in love with when I saw it.
Well, who are some of the artists that are participating?
Well, not a lot of them. Some of them are big names, and some of them. I'm just going to go through at my gallery. Mm-hmm. I can't remember all two, but we have Mel Wright, who's an African American photographer, and Leroy Henderson, who's a very famous African American photographer. And at my gallery, we have photography, and we have sculpture, and we have paintings.
Mm-hmm. Where is your gallery located?
In Clinton Hill, 334 Grand Avenue, the Corridor Gallery. Mm-hmm. And then we have another photographer named Nina Levy, and then a Latin American photographer named Louis Malo. Mm-hmm. And then we have in the gallery sculpture Charlotte Perrier, who's the sister-in-law to Martin, the famous sculptor Martin Perrier, and she's a great sculptor, and Helen Ramzaram, who's Ethiopian, and we have Terry Richardson, who's a painter, and there are a lot of painters and sculptors who have not shown in my gallery who ended up there, and like, oh, this is a great, same thing. Mm-hmm. This is a great space. I didn't know it, and that's one of the things African-American artists don't necessarily know what the spaces are like in Williamsburg. And one of the great things is galleries have stopped their regular programming to put this on. So, well, we were going to do this in this month, but now because of this, how great this project is, we're gonna move that show and put this show in there.
Now, in terms of setting these things up, you preview the art before it comes, or the artist comes to you and says, "Look, I'd like to show in your show."
Well, we did with this case because it's going to try to get such a wide range of artists. We used the Brooklyn Museum and the Brooklyn Arts Council and the New York Foundation for the Arts to send out a call for artists. Mm-hmm. And we got over 600 applications back with slides and whatever. And we put together a panel. There were several committees to make this show happen. You know, there's a marketing committee, and there was a curatorial committee, and 6 people sat on that committee, and I was one of them. We went through 600 submissions, and it boiled down to 232. My gallery has 32 artists, and some of the other galleries have 10, 20. A few galleries are opening for the first time with Project Diversity, a place out in Sunset Park called Tabla Rasa. It's their first opening. The borough president's going to be there and cut the ribbon, and it opens with Project Diversity.
Now, is most of the art related to African-American themes or environmental themes or gender themes? How is the art developing? Years ago when I was working with the Sinclair Gallery, practically all of the art from these artists, Critchlow and Vincent Smith and those people, was African-American focused. Now, what about these artists? Are they focused on African-Americans or their own particular ethnic group? What is the direction?
There are a few artists who are focused on ethnicity as subject matter, but most of these artists focus on different things. Some are abstract painters, and I think, a lot of the abstract painters, their paintings reflect anything. A few of them have, my abstract painting, for example, is influenced by African art. But as it abstracts, you can tell from tones and intonation, but there's nothing distinctive like back in the days you'd have a black figure sitting there or something. Yeah. I don't think much of the art is distinctive in that way. Most of the art is in some sort of abstraction. There's few, like the artist here on the cover of here, he's South American, so he has a South American theme. But I don't think there's a lot of political art. And I don't think that as many African Americans nowadays are doing art that is race and politically objective as it used to, as their objective as it used to be.
Now, as an artist, I'm going to ask you a question. What motivates an artist to get into art and express him or herself through an art medium?
A lot of different things. For me, it is a spiritual need create things that I was feeling outside. You know, I'm an author also, and it taps into the same spiritual need to express myself and to express what I see is going on around me through abstract terms, and to have communication myself with my higher power. Yeah, as I say, a spiritual need. Other people paint out of a need to make social commentary, and other people paint out of a need. Some people paint out of a need to be famous. You know, there's some artists who just really, you know, paint because it puts them in the limelight. But it comes from all different places. But for me, it's a spiritual need to express myself and be creative.
Now, as you express yourself through these abstract presentations, what guides you in terms of what you put here, what you put there, what colors you use, what forms you use?
You know, a lot of different things. One of the things that I do and have done is I take snapshots in my mind of things that I see. Well, you know, not literal things, but you might see a shade or a tone or something. Out of a big picture, you'll see something the way a shadow is, and it leaves an impression, and so you might incorporate that into your work. I have 1,000 pieces of African art in my loft. And so I'm constantly being given information. And even though I don't paint figuratively, there's spiritual information that comes from these ritual objects and from the textiles, African textiles, patterns and color information that I'm constantly getting from all the art that I live with. So that's part of my process.
Now, there have been a whole range of really important black artists.
Oh.
I can't just name all of them, I'll just name a few.
You named a few of them before.
Elizabeth Catlett,
yes.
Jacob Lawrence,
Romare Bearden,
Norman Lewis, Ernie Critchlow, Vincent Smith. How much inspiration did you get from those folks?
The big out of that group of people that you just mentioned, I've shown with Norman Lewis. Not he's gone, but his daughter keeps his work, and I show with Norman around the country our works. So Norman has been a big influence. He's an abstract expressionist artist that didn't get the recognition that the other ones were getting at the time, but we knew who he was. And so Norman, the way he treats light and shapes and bends light and shapes, has been a big influence on the way I paint. You know, several times during my career, I've had artists that have uniquely influenced me. When I started out, it was Picasso, and I found out one of the things about Picasso that I liked was his African influence in his stuff. And I then found out about a Afro-Cuban painter named Wilfredo Lamb, who was even a bigger influence. And as my art got more abstract, you know, I found Norman Lewis, and I was like, oh, this is the direction I'm going in. I can see it clearly what I'm doing more reflected in what Norman did. And so, you know, there are always, for me, going to be silent mentors when I look at other people's paintings that give me information to push me just a little further. And I don't emulate their art, but I incorporate the spirit of what they do in the spirit of what I'm trying to do.
I think each artist has his or her own particular style. I remember Benny Andrews years ago, who had his very creative, exciting style.
Benny's still painting.
And then Jacob Lawrence, his cubism and his way of expressing the black experience. His was much more directly related to the black experience, so much so that his work is all over the place where they ever want to talk about blacks in the arts.
You know, for us as a people, the artwork that came before this generation of artists that spoke to the black experience directly was so necessary for us with our self-imaging. You know, when Jacob Lawrence painted the Migration series, he documented who we were, where we came from. When Romare Bearden did those collages about Harlem and jazz, they document who we were and where we came from, because a lot of that was denied to us in education, and we didn't have the outlets for the information that we needed. So the artists provided outlets for us to understand what our identity was. And it's so necessary that a lot of the paintings that I do, if abstract, the titles relate back to our ancestral expressions and ancestral things. And so it's important that artists continue to reflect, whether abstractly or literally, the experience of the people. When a culture dies, all that's left, any culture that we look at, what's left that tells about that culture was its art and its literature. And so our culture
and archaeology. Remember the bones.
And,
remember the bones.
Bones will tell you some stuff. But you know, when you look at the Greek culture and the African culture, you say, oh, this is what they were creating at this time. This is who they were spiritually. This is where their heads were at. And so that's what we're doing as artists, largely documenting the times we live in and what's going on in our spiritual and physical lives.
What about the training of today's artists? Are there more opportunities for particularly African American artists to get training? Are there more people going into it? Because there are other mediums now. There's the film medium, the dance medium, and the television medium, and the drama medium, where they can express some of the main things you talked about in terms of our heritage and our history. So what about the opportunities for African Americans to be trained in art?
I mean, I think the enrollment of African Americans, I don't have any empirical data on this, but when I go to college campuses and I lecture around the country, I see more young African Americans going on. There are a lot of opportunities, not just with fine arts for African Americans. There's graphic arts and there's computer arts, and there's a lot of related fields where people know they can get a job. And that's one of the things my father used to say, because he worked next to Romeo Beard in the Welfare Center on 14th Street. My father said, well, Romeo kept his job. and so, but you know, one of the things that have kept a lot of young people, African Americans included, was the belief that it's hard to make a living in the arts, and it is. I'm not going to sit there and tell you, but there are more opportunities. There are more galleries now, and the gallery system has opened up somewhat to be more inclusive. I think largely in Brooklyn, why it's so inclusive and why these galleries are so ready to show a show like Project Diversity is because these are artist-run spaces. A lot of them, artists, out of the need to have spaces to show work, have created their own galleries, and a lot of galleries like that are in Brooklyn. And these artists know how hard it is to get shown, and they understand what it is. So they're more open to doing things that are a little bit outside the box, whereas commercial galleries, and in this article I talk about it, largely show white males. That's who the auction houses sell, and that's who are out there in most of the galleries hanging on the walls. A few female artists and a few other artists of color. And so when artists create and run their own spaces, they are more open to diversity of all types, not only of age and race and gender, but diversity of the types of art that they will show. They're not as commercially driven. But there are opportunities out there, and a lot of young blacks are entering the art field. I know Brooklyn is chock full of young black artists.
What about the formal training in places like Pratt Institute and NYU, School of the Arts? What about that kind of training?
Oh, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of young blacks. I'm right down the block from Pratt, and I gave an art show to Pratt graduate students last year. And there were several young blacks in that art show and reflecting the graduate program at Pratt and the undergraduate. The guy, Derek Adams, who runs my Rush Gallery in Chelsea, graduated from Pratt. And I've been putting on, with Pratt, symposiums in the arts. And a lot of young artists, you know, it's not a huge percent, but, you know, if you look on that campus, we're dotted there. We're not unseen, and our work is not unfelt.
Now, Brooklyn seems to be the epicenter of this new emerging interest in the arts. To what do you attribute that? Because it used to be Greenwich Village, but it was a little bit of Harlem. Still is some of Harlem. Not as much in the Bronx or Queens. Now, what brings that about?
Well, you know, Brooklyn has always had a large creative community, and around my neighborhood, I guess one of the things, and I've thought about this and talked about this for a while, Pratt has been an anchor. And a lot of the artists that went to Pratt just stayed in the neighborhood. So there's the arts community, whether they were showing galleries there, a lot of artists started living around there. Brooklyn also, the real estate was cheaper. It's changing a lot nowadays everywhere. But the real estate was cheaper, and you get bigger spaces, you have space to paint. And so we've developed a very, very vibrant art scene in Brooklyn, hence all these galleries springing up. So there are a lot of artists. Every other person you know is somewhere in the arts in Brooklyn. I mean, the poetry movement, as you know, I was one of the creators of Deaf Poetry, and the poetry movement grew up out of, you know, again, resurged in Brooklyn with a lot of poetry clubs and a lot of poets being there. And now there's a new music genre in Brooklyn that's growing up there, young, doing all types of different music. And last year,
is that reggae based in the main?
No, it's a lot of it is rock and roll based.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a lot of the people who created the Black Rock Coalition of Brooklynites, and there's a next generation after them of young artists, multicultural, who are doing rock and roll music that appeals to everyone. And last year, to pull that together, a guy named Brian Tate and myself put together the Brooklyn New Music Festival with the help of the borough president's office, and we're going to do that again this year also. So we're trying to really catch all the vibrancy of the arts in Brooklyn and bring them together and make sure that Brooklyn is known as the place where this stuff is coming out, but also to give some daylight to these artists and help promote what they're doing there in Brooklyn.
To what extent has the city's officialdom embraced your project? The mayor, the economic development person, the cultural center, the arts, and so on.
Well,
to what extent have they been helpful?
Not the mayor, but the Brooklyn Borough President, Marty Markowitz.
Yeah, I know Marty's been very helpful.
Marty and his staff are wonderful. They're part of the show. They have a gallery there in Borough Hall, and they're opening their gallery, and they're part of Project Diversity. And Marty has come out and spoken about it and talked about it, and he thinks it's a wonderful thing that we're doing. And so, and they've been helpful in pointing us in the direction of sponsors and things like that. And, you know, so it has not, because it's a Brooklyn-based initiative, it hasn't reached Mike yet. But he's aware of it.
Well, to what extent should this concept permeate the entire city? Because you made the point that the big galleries in Manhattan are primarily white male-based and don't include a lot of diversity, both in the work and in the people who are doing it. To what extent can you use this as a lever to begin to open up that field?
Well, I think, you know, when you start with what you know you can do and you demonstrate that it works well, a lot of the galleries, you know, in Manhattan spend a lot of money for rent. And so their concern is going to be, can I sell this art? When they see the quality of the art that people are doing and they get the feeling that they could sell some of it, they'll be on it. Most Manhattan galleries are commercially based. I think that we would have a greater chance of success if we targeted Manhattan nonprofits, nonprofit galleries, you know, whose funding comes from other sources other than direct sales. We could probably pull this off, and I'm sure a few of the commercial galleries would join in. I think that at this point in the arts, people are open to thinking about diversity, whether it's practice or not. I think, you know, it's all tied to dollars, and if they think they can make $1 out of it, they're for it. And so we'd have to demonstrate that, you know, that the art is viable and there's a market for these type of things. A lot of these artists that are in this do show in galleries in in Manhattan. You know, these are not unknown artists, a lot of them. And so I think that the idea is very saleable for Manhattan.
I see a parallel with what happened with black music and black art. Years ago, black musicians did not get paid well. Much of their work was stolen. It wasn't recognized. And now black music has moved into the mainstream and people are recognizing it. But those older people who started this have not been rewarded. I've read about several of the great artists who made blues songs and so on. They were just stolen away from them. The guy who stole the work for Elvis Presley, for example. To what extent is this happening with black artists? Are black artists being exploited in any way?
I think the older black, I don't know if they're being exploited, but they weren't recognized in the way they should have been. Norman Lewis was one of the greatest American expressionist painters and did not get the recognition. Even though he won several large international competitions, he did not get the shows in the galleries and the fame that other artists of the same period, Jackson Pollock and all those other people got.
It was almost as though they picked out one African-American artist.
Well, they did. They picked John Michel.
Yeah.
I wrote a book pretty much about that called 3 Days as the Crow Flies, about the East Village art scene in the 80s, where you had this one black artist and everybody else was shut out. I think that's opened up quite a bit now. But, you know, it's still that African-American artists are getting more exposure. A good friend of mine, a young Kenyan artist, Kenyan American artist, and she's, well, I guess she's really African American.
Yes, exactly.
Wageshi Mutu was on the cover of Art News 2 months ago. This month, Kehinde Wiley, who just had his own show at the Brooklyn Museum, is on the cover of Art in America, and he was one of the artists that we showed several years ago at Rush, at my gallery in Chelsea. So we're getting some recognition, the young artists, by the mainstream. But there's so many more artists that are not getting the recognition. So you pick out a couple of superstars, but there's so many young African-American artists knocking on the doors of mainstream galleries and not receiving access. Some are, but so many more are not.
If anyone wants to get information about Project Diversity in the Arts, how would they get it?
Well, we have a website on my foundation's website. It's rushphilanthropic.org, and then we have several pages within that website. But you can learn a lot about the foundation me and Russell started and the work we do with children in the arts on that website. And you'll also find out about Project Diversity on that website.
And we'll find out something about Danny Simmons. I hope you have some of your work on the website.
No, I don't have any of my work. We have some pictures of me and some of the kids. But my work can be seen on my website, The Corridor Gallery, thecorridorgallery.org. And I have 70 or 80 paintings on there in my bio and stuff like that. So you can get a chance to see my work there.
Well, you've come a long way, Danny. A long way.
From NYU when I was there with your daughter-in-law and son, man.
That's exactly right.
Thank you. I really enjoyed talking with you, man.
Okay, today on African American Legends, we've been talking with Danny Simmons, artist, the director of Project Diversity in the Arts, and we will certainly look forward to seeing more diversity in the arts. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank
Danny.
you, Dr. Brown.